Hello team and welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan Ernest Pearce. Ukraine War news update, second part thereof for the 10th of September 2023. We're going to go straight to the Frontline update segment. I'll wait a little bit of time throughout the day and try and do a full Frontline update separate video, as I say, later in the day, if there's anything to add rather than doing it straight after this video. Anyway, what can I tell you? Well, thanks first of all to JR for helping with the mapping here. He's updated the two mappers I mainly rely on, the pro-Ukrainian mapper or objective mapper, I'd say, Andrew Perpetua, and the very pro-Russian mapper, Suriyat maps. These blue pins, dark blue, show the Suriyat maps emitting some Ukrainian advances. Light blue is Andrew Perpetua claiming Ukrainian advances, and dark red pins here are Suriyat maps saying there are Russian advances. So a few things to have a look at. First of all, let's go to have a look and see what is going on in Bakhmut. If we go back to my map, there's not too much detail of anything happening in the northeastern sector. We'll have a look in more depth later, of course. So we're actually going to pop into Bakhmut to see what's been going on there. And as you can see, nothing particularly happening to the north, or at least there is stuff happening, but there isn't any territorial exchanges. But down to the south of Bakhmut in the Klishchiivka area, this is, I think, very important. There are quite a number of claims that Andriivka has now been liberated. Indeed, you see both Andrew Perpetua and Suriyat maps admitting or claiming that Andriivka has been liberated. It's either fully grey zone or, at any rate, the Russians are not there. So whether the Ukrainians can be said to control it will be a different question. But that is significant because we were expecting that to happen. Klishchiivka has pretty much been liberated by the Ukrainians, or at the last of the Russians, according to many sources, being pushed out of there. And you'll see, I think, this railway line become the defensive line all the way down from up here through to Kurdyivka. But of course, I say that, but even south of Andriivka, it is claimed that the Ukrainians have pushed the Russians back there. So I think this defensive line will just eventually all crumble as the Ukrainians get this breakthrough, and they use that to their advantage to be able to come behind the Russians on that defensive line and attack them from several directions. Kurdyivka, you would think, is not going to be long for Russian occupation. But yeah, that's a major success for the Ukrainians there to take Andriivka. It's not a massive place, of course, but you know how long some of these even tiny places can hold on. Things are really difficult. Russians are defending with everything. Someone was talking this morning in one of the threads that, yeah, there are all these claims about low Russian morale and this and that, and ammunition and food, and they're not happy, yet they're still fighting. Are we just deluding ourselves? And my answer was no, they definitely do have low morale. The question is, how much does low morale translate into actual changes on the battlefield? And I think because of things like barrier troops, because you might have the lowest morale ever, but it's still the same problem. If I run away, I'm going to get shot by my own troops. And we've heard so much of this that it is true that they do have these barrier troops. So I'm going to get shot if I run backwards. Therefore, all I can do is continue to fight or surrender. And actually, there is quite a large number of surrenderings. In May, from September, when the Ukrainians started it, they are claiming, so this is the Ukrainians claiming, so take that with a pinch of salt. The Ukrainians claim that 16,000 Russian soldiers have surrendered to the surrender hotline, right? That's a massive number of people. Now, if anywhere near that number is true, then morale can translate into low morale, can translate into a benefit for the Ukrainians. But it doesn't necessarily mean that you have all these horror stories about what's going on the front line for Russian soldiers. But it doesn't necessarily mean that they aren't going to shoot you if you try and attack them, right? So both these things can be true, that the Russians have terrible morale and things aren't great and they don't have all the equipment they want, but they're dug in, and if the Ukrainians are attacking, they will shoot back and defend with all their might or all their ability, because it's like, do or die, really. So anyway, that's kind of my answer to that. Let's go and look at some of these sources then. So yesterday, we knew Andreevka had been liberated because Riba admitted it, and that's a pro-Russian source, very pro-Russian source. So when they admit that a place has been liberated by the Ukrainians, then it's probably happened. So Ukraine has liberated the settlement of Andreevka. Interesting that they use the phrase. Oh no, this is Global War Monitor. Riba would never use the word liberated. No official or visual confirmation of this at the time, though. That was back yesterday afternoon. So I think it's now generally accepted that's the case. And then, yeah, that's really all we have for Bakhmut. So we're going to come down now to Avdiivka, and Surat Maps, whilst yesterday claimed that the Russians had taken this or rejigged their mapping to have Russians in control of this, but the very next day they changed it back to having Ukrainian control around Opitny. There are different claims as to how much of Opitny has been or how far back the Russians have been pushed in Opitny. But it is, I think, quite a significant area of activity, and Surat Maps admitting that, yeah, pretty much the town is being flanked to the east. But also that there are some gains, according to Surat Maps, again, near Pervomaysky and Interpisky. And this seems to be as the site of a bit of a push from the Ukrainians. Now, the question is whether that is catching up with what Andrew Perpetua previously said. Is that something of the last 24 hours or just effectively a bit of a lag? I don't know. And so let's look at a few other sources. Tim White says Ukraine's military today confirmed it's entered Opitny. And 2 days ago, when Russia stormed positions in the north of the city, we conducted a brilliant operation and occupied a part of Opitny. Yeah, that is a claim of the Ukrainians there. So what they're saying there is there must have been some activity of the Russians to the north, and while they were doing that, the Ukrainians took that opportunity to attack to the south when they weren't expecting it. And then here, Global War Monitor says Ukraine has entered the... Oh, no, we're going on to Novomyrilsk. Oh, that was quick. I thought there was one more on Opitny. But anyway, keep an eye out on that. Opitny seems to be an area of some success for the Ukrainians. Right, we're going to come down to southern Donetsk now, on the southern Donetsk front, past Vuhledar onto Novomyrilsk and Novodonetsk, where there is quite a bit of activity taking place. And indeed, the Ukrainians have increased their control while they push the Russians back, shall we say, into the middle of Novomyrilsk. Well, this is what I claimed yesterday. I said, and Surat Maps is admitting what we knew yesterday, and they're admitting that today. Andrew Perpetua is a day ahead. The likelihood is that the Russians are probably pushed to the south of the town today by now. There will be a lag from all of these sources from what's actually happening. And it could well be that Novomyrilsk is fully a grey zone now and not under control of the Russians, but that is my speculation. Anyway, what's been said here, this was yesterday afternoon. Ukraine entered the settlement of Novomyrilsk. A surrounding area of 5 square kilometers has been added to the liberated status. So actually, it's quite a big area of increased Ukrainian control there. Novodonetsk, which is just to the west, is becoming an Uruzhany situation for Russia, which is to say, I believe it's kind of going to get cut off and surrounded until it's completely untenable and the Russians have to pull out. So it's being at the moment surrounded on at least 2 flanks, possibly a little bit of pressure from the northeast as well. But if Novomyrilsk falls, then you can imagine that will be stuck out on its own. As I said before, these kind of 3 settlements, this triad of settlements, rely on each other for mutual support. Okay, then this is more recent. So this is this morning. Russians in Novomyrilsk, this is from a Russian source, are showing a high level of anxiety. The Moscow boys are on their own, according to P-Star 11, looking at the Russian source, and we'll come to that in a second. Ukrainians mined the rear. The Ural track has been destroyed. Non-stop assaults, including at night, and soon retreat to a more favourable position will be the order of the day. So that is a few interesting nuggets there. So let's read the Russian source. On Novomyrilsk, the topographical situation is more complicated. It is a lowland in a lowland and visible from all sides. The enemy combines artillery strikes with infantry drops in combat vehicles, which we have seen. We saw one MRAP gets sort of stuck near the trenches on, oh, it wasn't an MRAP, it's probably an APC, stuck on a bunch of mines and then hit with artillery from the Russians, but it just shows that that's exactly what they're doing, attacking. Continuing to do this at night. The word persistence does not reflect this state. Frenzy is more suitable. Wow, so that is, you know, that says a lot that the Russians here are thinking that the Ukrainians are doing a frenzied attack. It is with such hysterical frenzy that he tries to snatch this at least a piece and goes to any lengths to do this. Yesterday, remote mining of our rear areas was very active. Charged drones regularly flew out to hunt. Everything was done to make it as difficult as possible for us to communicate with positions. So there's going to be electronic warfare taking place. There's going to be remote mining, so sending up maybe ram shells that explode. So let's go back to look at the map. So this is to say that they're mining the Russians behind, which means if they're trying to get supplies into Novomyrsk, then they come across mines, and you know they lose equipment, they lose personnel in trying to supply this, which means that it becomes increasingly less tenable to stay there. Now, this reminds me very much of Klishchiivka recently, where the Ukrainians took out the ground lines of communication and then were precision artillery hitting the positions in this case Klishchiivka. I imagine it's going to be the same thing, so that the Russians eventually, just there's no point in staying there, getting hammered, and they can't supply their troops. Anyway, to continue the source, it says another Ural was burned for us, but this is not fatal. The main thing is that people remain safe. In general, we are fighting. In other words, we lost the vehicle, but there weren't people in it. That's how I translate that. Okay, so then we're going to move on to the west a little bit. So that is Novodonetsk and Novomayorsk. Not too much to be heard about Staromayorsk area and Zavitnya Bazyanye. Syriac Maps is kind of going along with what Andrew Perpetua said, in that there are some Russian gains in the Priyutne area. I don't think that is particularly from yesterday, or if it is, it's a mixture of yesterday and what we'd already learned from the day before from Andrew Perpetua. Be interesting to see news from there. And then some Russian gains here, which is not somewhere we've seen, in between sort of Marfapil and I guess Stepova, I guess Priyutne or somewhere like that. So yeah, in this area, some Russian gains there. So that is, I don't know what that tells us, but the Russians are still prodding and probing themselves in some of these places then. And then we come to Robotyne area, and the Russians having, being pushed back again by the Ukrainians, according to Syriac Maps, in this very, the Ukrainians pushing in to the south, to the east of Novoprokopivka here, and also pushing down to the south on top of Novoprokopivka. In fact, I'll show you some footage and geolocation to suggest where the Ukrainians are pushing in this particular area to the northeast of Novoprokopivka. So what do some of the sources say about here? Well, Zaporizhia direction, the advance of the armed forces of Ukraine east of Novoprokopivka, close to the Dragon's Teeth and the defense line of the Russian forces, was recorded. Pay attention to the positions of the Ukrainians in landing and the Dragon's Teeth. The distance is 50 to 100 meters. So here is here's a mapping that goes along with that, so that the Ukrainians are having some joy, as I was saying, going south to the east of Novoprokopivka. Here we have evidence of the Dragon's Teeth and trenches in that area. We know that they've sort of got over the Dragon's Teeth further to the northeast of where we're talking about right now. Andrew Perpetua says, based on satellite images and video, I decided to update my map around Robotyne to this. In other words, there are gains for the Ukrainians, but the gains are within the grey zone area. So it's not that the Russian defensive lines have been pushed back, but the Ukrainians are making advances and consolidating positions, which is kind of actually what the general staff often say. He goes on to say here, you can see where the geolocated videos are in relation to the drawn line. So he's got lots of videos. Go and check his map out. Yeah, I don't know if anything else is worth saying. Yeah, so this is interesting. This goes back to Avdiivka. He mentions a little bit about Pervomaisky, which is near Donetsk. The line has changed with respect to a new view of Russian shelling, 0.69 square kilometers, which is nice. So that is a gain around there. I wonder if that gain up in Pervomaisky wasn't a Suryat Maps gain there, but is actually a Andrew Perpetua gain. I don't know. Colours a little bit funky there. Nonetheless, Andrew Perpetua showing all his changes there, and a little bit on the Dnipro River too that he talks about. But we'll go back and look at other sources. So Ukrainian armed forces claim they advance another 1.5 kilometers in the Robotyne region, according to the spokesman of the defense forces of the Tavria region. So this is possibly that they have. Well, I don't know how you see that, because, as I say, Andrew Perpetua says that the increase in territory is in the grey zone, and if that is what the general staff is saying is their advances, then you won't see it, as I say, in the movement of the Russian defensive line. And then there's a few other things to add to this. So here we have Ukrainian tanks shelling Russian positions near Novoprokopivka in the Zaporizhia region. So there's some, again, like I said this morning in the first video, there's an awful lot of footage coming out to do with, tank maneuvers and all sorts. The odd bit of tank on tank, and tanks in this case taking on trench lines in trying to do combined arms maneuvers. These have been geolocated. In fact, this is possibly slightly more comprehensive here from Mosin Technical, saying Novoprokopivka, a pair of T-64s. Now, the first thing of interest here is that these are old tanks that they're using at the forefront of the vanguard. They're not using their top-notch Leopard 2s, for example. And that's an interesting question. Why bother having these good tanks if you're not going to use them in the the most needed situations? And there are arguments for and against this. Is like, well, you don't want to waste your good tanks getting degraded here, but then if this is where the action is, you want your best tanks so they can do the most damage and do it quicker and more effectively than these older tanks. So again, why have them, and so on and so forth. So maybe there are other times where it's more effective to use maybe Leopard 2s and Challengers, but in this case, a T-64 does a job. Especially if it's been, I don't know if these have been upgraded or whatnot. Anyway, so this is T-64s from the 116th Mechanized Brigade engaging close quarters combat with Russian positions as they clear and approach towards the town Novoprokopivka. Seen here, a Russian Lancet misses one of the Ukrainian tanks, and I believe an ATGM misses a tank. I saw somewhere else that an ATGM missed and a Lancet hit one of the tanks, but I don't think too much of an issue. Anyway, good graphic here to show you. So this is Novoprokopivka here, and we have the Ukrainian tanks active around here and firing on, I think, these positions. I think that is where the tanks are firing at, rather than that's where the tank is firing from. So they're possibly these four positions that are being targeted by the tank there. So that is tanks. See that long dark piece of ground there? That long dark piece of ground. The tanks are moving along there and up there. So this is to say the tanks are moving along here and up there. And if they are doing that, then this Russian line, this is within the Russian defensive line as according to Andrew Perpetua, and it's right next to the Russian line as according to Suryat Map. So I would then I'd realistically push that Russian line. This is certainly a grey zone. If you've got tanks active there, then really it's going to look something like that. And things are happening on the edge of Novoprokopivka. That would be my speculation, but these mappers maybe know more than I do. But if you've definitely got tanks like driving up there and then driving up there and then firing here, and here, then I think my speculation is there's probably some good rationale for that. So anyway, let me know what you think. So it could be that the Ukrainians have pushed the Russians back in this Novoprokopivka area. And then an update from P-Star 11 from this morning says in the Robotyne update, Ukrainians are not only pressing forward, but they're also trying to widen the wedge created into the Russian defense. Reports of attacks on Kopani, Novoprokopivka, and Verbove. So I'll let you know where these are. This is what he means by widening. Attacks on Kopani, Verbove, and Novoprokopivka. So trying to widen that salient. Ideally, you want something that looks like that. Let me just draw that on. So if the Russian lines were something like this, then you can easily get, well, not easily, but you can more easily get your supplies down the middle of this to, you know, to feed your troops on a front line. If you've got a very narrow salient like this, then actually, you know, let's think about how wide that is, and whether, you know, so that's like 12 kilometers. So really, you can fire ATGMs from here and hit somewhere almost in the middle, and fire ATGMs from that side and hit somewhere in the middle. In other words, your ground line of communication is going to be really, really vulnerable to being attacked. So any supply of your front line is just very, very dodgy. You want to widen that salient, and that's what he's saying they are doing. Anyway, if Lvov falls, it puts the Russian forces north of it in a difficult situation. The idea is probably to force a retreat so that Ukrainian forces don't need to fight through the minefields north of Lvov. That would offer about a 25-kilometer wide gap for the Russian into the Russian defense. The obvious idea is to be able to bring in artillery and air defense systems closer to Tokmak to offer cover when the Surovikin line will be completely overcome. Note, I don't know, but I don't think Tokmak is the target in that area. Okay, so that's that. In the Zaporizhia direction, says a Russian source, the Ukrainian armed forces with artillery support attack Kopani from the east and Novopokrovka from the northeast. There is progress in the last section. And that means progress for the Ukrainians around Novopokrovka. Now, trying to make sense of this, Russians are bringing in a lot of reserves and counter-attacking the flank between Lvov and Novopokrovka to pull back our forces, which are moving in south of Robotyne and Zaporizhia direction realities. Obviously translation issues and whatnot, but this might suggest that in this area the Russians have had some success in pushing the Ukrainians back. Maybe, I don't know. They are counterattacking, but as I always say about these counterattacks in these areas, does it work in the long run? So they would be exhausting their troops, attriting them possibly at rates they wouldn't be attrited if they just sat back and defended. And therefore, in the long run, it might be less advantageous for them to counterattack, even though they might take back land. It's what happens after that, and whether they kind of exhaust themselves and culminate and make themselves weaker. Ukraine has once again crossed the Dnipro. We're going on to Dnipro now. So coming out of there, haven't heard anything about the Lvov area really, but Dnipro, there's talk about. Well, here we're going to talk about just where the Ukrainians were in the Dacia area. Not at the Antonevsky Bridge there. Here we have, once again, the Ukrainians have crossed the Dnieper and formed another bridgehead in the Russian-occupied side of the river. Ukraine will try to link this bridgehead with the Dacia one, if not done already. So these two are less than 2 kilometers apart. So what I believe that means is that while they have presence here, they also maybe have presence here. And so they've extended this area of control, and that might give the Russians something to think about. You want as many places along here to have control, so the Russians don't know where to hit with their possibly limited artillery, or the counter battery fire that they don't have here is an issue for them. So I'm presuming their artillery isn't quite as densely situated as it once was, and so if you can thin out that threat, then that would be advantageous. So anyway, another position taken by the Ukrainians there. Right, let's go to military aid. That's been me speaking for way too long. Military aid. So Japan to transfer, or other aid, to transfer 24 cranes to Ukraine for demining. I don't know how demining works with cranes, but I'm sure someone will let me know. Japanese Prime Minister Yoshimasa Hayashi emphasized that his country, they are presently playing rugby against Chile at the moment, so there you go. Japanese Prime Minister Yoshimasa Hayashi emphasized that his country would continue to support the anti-Russian sanctions. In addition, Japanese businessmen presented cooperation projects in communication infrastructure and medicine. So it's really good to see Japan get firmly on board with supporting Ukraine. That's not, I think that's Denis Shimal, the prime minister, rather than being Alexei Reznikov. There's like three of them that look really similar. Anyway, Denmark, now I told you about the Leopard 1A5s being given, 10 of them at least have been given already, more on their way, and the Ukrainians are being trained on the Leopard 1A5 tanks. Denmark are heavily involved in that. Denmark took Leopard 1A5 tanks from 3 museums in order to start training the Ukrainian military faster. The tanks from the museums turned out to be in better condition than the 100 units that had remained in storage, which you can possibly imagine. But imagine that, like, pull them out of a museum and, hey, these bad boys work pretty well. Get them used. So good stuff there. This is the sort of thing that Ukraine seem to be doing with the help of randoms, volunteers, and whatnot, or indigenous outfits. I don't know if the same kind of thing is taking place with the Russians. Homemade machine remotely controlled for clearing anti-personnel mines, which will soon be handed over to the Ukrainian military. Well, that's fantastic. What a great university project or something for an engineering department. I mean, why not? Why not set all your universities up with you can get a PhD as long as it's in helping out the armed forces of Ukraine. That's fine. Whatever your PhD is in or whatever your degree's in, let's kind of put it towards helping the war effort. Moving on. So Ukraine will receive even more Gepard to produce the energy to protect the energy infrastructure. So Russia are possibly going to hit the Ukrainian energy infrastructure really hard in this autumn going into winter, like they did last year. It didn't particularly work. At least the overall outcome was underwhelming. So they really didn't hammer the energy infrastructure enough, and the Ukrainians were able to have the energy to heat their homes and whatnot in the main. Whereas it was a real big worry, and also it was a lot more of a milder winter than people were anticipating. But anyway, they're going to be getting some Gepards. I don't know where from. Could be from another Middle Eastern country or something. Probably through Germany again. These cheetahs or Gepards, although a cheetah is also a version of the Gepard from the Netherlands that was upgraded to a particular type. Anyway, whatever. So that's good news. They can get more of them. So the UK adapted its ASRAAM air-to-air missiles to launch from a Super Cat truck and donated it to Ukraine. So I told you about this previously. Read on for how that experiment is going and for the background on the bespoke British weapon designed to outrange other short-range missiles. We'll dip into that here. So here we have that vehicle. So I just want to get down to what I think is the most important part. So bear with me 2 ticks. So the missiles on board this. So first of all, this is shoot and scoot. So it's a short to medium range what would normally be an air-to-air missile, but launched from the ground now. These are pretty decent missiles that are basically the competitor to the Sidewinder, as far as I can work out. There's lots of technical detail in here, but I think this would be a really good complement to what they have, and possibly increase their capabilities by launching decent air-to-air missiles from the ground, but it enable them to push back some of those Ka-52 attack helicopters, drones, so on and so forth. So Ukrainian frontline combat units particularly lack modern mobile medium range or high-end short range air defenses, which this is, that can accompany advancing troops and scoot away after firing to avoid retaliatory attacks. ASRAAM should have just enough reach to engage Russian attack helicopters, most commonly the Ka-52s, that are using Vickers and LMUR missiles, which have ranges of 7 to 8 miles, whereas this should have a 9 to 15 mile range to pick off Ukrainian armor at long distances. So if they can take some of those airframes out, so the idea here is that they can threaten. So assuming the lighter ASRAAM falls somewhere between somewhat short of cams, it doesn't matter all this technical stuff, surface launch performance, say somewhere between 9 and 15 miles, they still would have enough to reach to threaten Russia's jets, drones, and missile-armed helicopters at medium altitude. So that is good news. I don't know how many of these they've got, but they've got these ASRAAM missiles on the back of a Super Cat, shoot and scoot, decent, fairly high-end, short to medium range missile system. So good stuff. Okay. French supplied VAB APC in Ukrainian airborne service. The reason I've just included this kind of picture and that is that, we don't often hear about French stuff, and some people, criticize the French for not giving enough, but sometimes they do give things, we just don't hear about it because they don't shout about the stuff they give. So that could be another example. Russia could fan Chris P saying this. Russia could probably increase its production of artillery ammunition to 2 million per year. This is according to a Reuters article. But this would not be enough to fight a war against Ukraine. Quote, they, the occupiers, have a rather difficult situation because if you spent 10 million rounds last year, which they did, and you're in the middle of a fight, which they are, and you can only produce 1 to 2 million rounds a year, which appears to be the case, then I don't think it's a very strong position. Besides, when you lose 2,000 tanks, it takes you a decade to reach the number you started with, the unnamed official told the publication. And I think that's a probably pretty safe analysis there. Russia has deployed 46 launchers of the Iskander missile complex along the border with Ukraine, according to the deputy head of State for Security Service, Vadim Skibitsky. He added that these complexes are aimed at civilian infrastructure objects. If that is indeed true, 46 Iskander launchers along the border with Ukraine is a real threat. However, what were they doing before that? Were they firing from somewhere else? And if they're now close to the border, are they more vulnerable to attacks from the Ukrainians? Well, let's hope so. Let's hope that something like ATACMS could be used, or I don't know, something needs to be used to take those out because they are a threat, right? The UK Defence Intelligence update from today is worth a little read. So in Russia's Pskov Oblast, so that's that airbase that was hit up to the north of Russia near Latvia and Estonia. Remember that one that was hit recently? Anyway, it goes on to say, close to the Estonian border, the governor has organised volunteer security patrols to interdict further uncrewed aerial vehicle UAV attacks against Kresti airbase. Reportedly, up to 800 citizens have signed up to join the patrols. This initiative follows a reported damage of 2 IL-76 transport aircraft on the 29th of August. Well, some are saying like 5 to 6 of them, actually. Due to the limited range of the quadcopter drones, the attacks were on the base, almost certainly launched from within the Russian Federation. The patrols will consist of groups of 50, divided among multiple municipalities, which will patrol border areas and critical infrastructure, particularly airports and air bases. The creation of these volunteer security patrols will likely act as a deterrent and provide a level of defense against quadcopter drones being operated from the immediate vicinity of the airbase. Historically, it has proven difficult to destroy drones using small arms fire, so Russian forces will still require air defense systems with a surveillance capability and both kinetic and electronic means of interception to destroy attacking drones. The use of volunteers highly likely indicates a shortage of trained security personnel within Russia. Well, yeah, if you need to... The one thing is, this is good for Russia. Like, they are getting up something to try and fight against these drone attacks, right? But on the other hand, they are forced to get volunteer groups because they have no one else. Why do they have no one else? Because everyone's been sent to the war. So this is a mixed bag here. I mean, it shows the desperate situation that the Russians are in, but at least they're kind of doing something to counter that. And we've seen like big netting over airframes, like I showed you this morning, and tires on top of airframes as well. So, you know, all of these will have some positive effect on the Ukrainian threat to those airframes, but they're in a difficult situation. Right. Chechen dictator Ramzan Kadyrov is reported to have had his deputy prime minister and former minister of health. It's basically his doctor that was prescribing him medicines, who was also acted as his deputy prime minister. He's been buried alive on suspicion of poisoning him. So you remember I reported that he had been poisoned some months ago. Like, this must have been it. And then he was like, he wasn't dead. And everyone's like, oh, okay, that's a load of nonsense. Well, actually, it wasn't nonsense. There was truth to it. He believed he was being poisoned by his doctor, and he's not been heard from since October 2022. So he's evidently a goner. And he didn't look particularly well at the time. So Russian media report that Kadyrov, worried and frightened by a sudden worsening of his health condition, accused the personal doctor, Elkan Suleimanov, who also served as deputy prime minister, of trying to poison him. The doctor disappeared without a trace in October 2022. And then, according to several sources, he was removed from all posts, brutally murdered and buried alive. Buried alive and thus brutally murdered. Suleimanov's last Telegram post is dated from October 2022, despite the fact that he used to update his profile almost daily. He was also not seen for a long time, either in Moscow educational institutions, which he often visited, or in Chechnya. Noticeably, his Instagram page shows a link to the website of the Chechen Republican Oncological Dispensary, which was his main project. However, the source claims that this site now sells cocaine in Dubai. Suleimanov was an extraordinary figure in Kadyrov's entourage. He was a Lezgin, not a Chechen, and had an impressive professional record in medicine. His abrupt disappearance and mysterious death raised many questions. On the subject of Kadyrov, some people are like, maybe you should remind people why. I have people in my thread saying, "Morning, legend. It's legend of the universe." And you might think, if you're new to the channel, you might think, "What the hell are they saying?" Basically, way back when, Chechen leader awarded himself Hero of Chechnya, and I reported this to the channel. I was like, he's just awarded himself Hero of Chechnya without ever fighting in Russia, and he's awarded himself this Hero of Chechnya new award, which is for fighters fighting over. What are you doing? You can't just award yourself. And so I might as well award myself Legend of the Universe, and then I created the Legend of the Universe award, and I awarded it to myself as a joke. But that's why people say that. Anyway, that's the background of that. All you need to know is Ramzan Kadyrov is a grade A plonker. Right, Shashank Joshi here reporting or quoting from the Times. A British parliamentary researcher has been arrested on suspicion of spying for China in what is alleged to be one of the most damaging breaches of security involving a hostile state at Westminster. The male suspect, said to be in his late 20s, is understood to be linked to a number of senior Tory MPs. They include Tom Tugendhat, who's, MOD, former MOD, and, was in a ring for being Prime Minister, actually. Security Minister, and Alicia Kearns, the chairman of the Commons Foreign Affairs Committee. So this is pretty damaging. Tugendhat said to have had only limited contact with the arrested researcher, who was hired by someone else, and severed contact with him when he began running for the Conservative Party leadership in July last year. He had no dealings with the suspect as Security Minister. The researcher is a Briton who held a parliamentary pass and has worked with MPs on international policy, including relations with Beijing, for several years. He previously spent time living and working in China, where officials fear he may have been recruited as a sleeper agent. Both MPs are, of course, China hawks, which makes the case particularly interesting. Suspects were arrested back in March, another case of very delayed reporting on national security arrests. So it's good they've got him, but that is a real worry for UK security there. Now, Putin, this is the Lula, Luis Inacio Lula da Silva. So Putin is welcome at the next G20 summit to be held in Rio de Janeiro in 2024. Putin could well come to Brazil, is what he said. Now, Brazil is a member of the ICC, which means actually Putin should be arrested because he's got an International Criminal Court arrest warrant on his head for war crimes. So that's interesting. And what I can say is that if I am president of Brazil and he comes to Brazil, there's no chance he'll be arrested. Right? That's really sad. That's really disappointed me. I mean, I had high hopes for Lula da Silva. I mean, I do in many other ways. I still do. So, for example, Jair Bolsonaro was an absolute tyrant and I think a despicable leader for a whole number of reasons. Environmentally, he absolutely should have just been jailed for what he did to the rainforest there, which is the lungs of the world. Whatever you think, just giving the rainforest across to beef farmers ain't a good thing. And he did that. And so Lula da Silva is trying to wrest that power back and give it to the indigenous peoples back again and look after what is really beneficial for the whole world. So there's the elements of what Lula does that I think are really good and are needed for that country, needed for the whole world. But his positioning on Ukraine and Russia has been a little bit all over the shop, but that is bad. That's all over, not good. So he needs calling out for that. But as ever, things are grey and not black and white. And so, with him, from my point of view anyway, there are elements that I think are so much better than Jair Bolsonaro for so many reasons. I don't want to derail this conversation, but on this, he's well wrong. And there needs to be some serious pressure put on Lula over this, as far as I'm concerned, by other international players. South Korean President Yoon Suk Yeol announced $2.3 billion in humanitarian aid for Ukraine during the G20 summit in New Delhi. Yonhap media outlet reported. I presume that's billion. South Korea will provide the initial $300 million in 2024 and $2 billion in the form of long-term, low-interest loans starting in 2025. Again, that's that long-term commitment to support of Ukraine. And that's really good. Thank you, South Korea. The European Commission has published guidance for exporting companies providing a comprehensive overview of due diligence requirements to prevent circumvention of sanctions against Russia. Really important there's clarity on sanctions because there are so many people able to get loopholes. Corporations will do that. They're not answerable to moral diktats or moral laws or whatever. They are answerable to shareholders, and they are striving for profit, and they will only do things that are morally decent generally if that is also financially to their benefit. So when you talk about like the virtue signaling of certain corporations, and you think, oh, that's them just being all woke and stuff, and that's a trigger word for me. I hate the word woke. It drives me up the wall. I think it's completely misused, and all it means is libtard, which also drives me up the wall. But anyway, don't think of them doing things for the good of humanity. Invariably, they're doing things because it's in their financial interest by reading the customer base, right? So here, there needs to be super clarity for corporations to be able to make the decisions they are required to make, but we can't expect them not to try and find loopholes around those sanctions because they want to maximize profit. This is why it's all about the regulatory bodies to stop them doing this. Like, we can't rely on these people being people running corporations to be moral, paragons of moral virtue. They're going to be paragons of capitalist endeavor, right? Which is we need to maximize our profits. So if we can't sell directly to Russia, then we're going to sell to Kyrgyzstan, and it's going to get into Russia that way, and we're still going to make a profit because our shareholders want it, and I get a nice bonus off it, and if I get a big house out of it, I'm going to do it, right? That's generally what's going to be happening. So it's really easy for us to say these are terrible people, they shouldn't do that, but unfortunately, that's just human behavior, and people suck, and so therefore we have to, or it's just natural human behavior. And what we have to do is have really strong and robust regulation in place and a clarity surrounding that. Anyway, I could talk for a long time about that, but I won't. Thank you very much for watching. Please like, subscribe, and share, and all that kind of stuff. Sorry, this one has been a long one, but there's a lot to discuss. Take care. Speak soon.